next guest, Senator Ted Cruz, also running for president, is no stranger for standing up for the tough stuff. And he is always there standing on God's side. And so we are honored to have Senator Ted Cruz with us on the line. Senator Cruz, thanks for joining us today.
Dan, my friend, good to be with you. Thank you for your strong conservative leadership each and every day in North Carolina.
Well, thank you, Senator. You've had some interesting times. And yesterday, in fact, in D.C. was probably another unprecedented time for Ted Cruz on the Senate floor. Why don't you tell our listeners what happened on the floor yesterday?
Well, I am leading the fight to urge Republicans to actually honor the commitments we made to the men and women who honored us. And in particular, we're having the budget fight right now. And I introduced an amendment to do two things. Number one, to say let's fund the entire federal government, but we should not be giving $500 million of taxpayer money to Planned Parenthood, a private organization. It's not part of the government. It's under multiple criminal investigations after being caught on tape apparently committing a pattern of ongoing felonies, and we shouldn't be giving $500 million of your and my money to an organization that has been filmed criminally selling the body parts of unborn children. The second component of the amendment said that we should not be giving $100 billion to Iran, to the Ayatollah Khamenei, $100 billion that will go to jihadists and be used to murder Americans. Now, sadly, this amendment was blocked, and it was blocked for a very simple reason, which is that Republican leadership in both houses has cut a deal with the Democrats, has cut a deal with Barack Obama and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi to fund Planned Parenthood, to fund the Iran deal, to fund all of Obama's legislative priorities. I think it's wrong. I'm leading the fight to stop it. But right now, leadership is doing everything they can to keep the funding going to Planned Parenthood.
You know, Senator, the story we hear back home is that, we don't have enough votes. It doesn't matter if we bring it up for a vote. It doesn't matter if we pass it. It's going to get vetoed. But I can tell you from word on the street, at least in North Carolina, as I travel around, is the sentiment is, let's send a bill a day to Barack Obama to veto. If we believe it's the right thing, put him on the defensive to veto everything. Let's not follow his lead. He needs to follow our lead. How do you feel about that scenario?
Dan, you're exactly right. I mean, we've got a fundamental imbalance right now. You've got ostensibly two sides in a political battle. On one side, the Democrats, Barack Obama and the Democrats, are absolutely committed to fighting for their liberal priorities. Barack Obama will practically crawl over broken glass with a knife between his teeth. He will not give in. He's like the Terminator. He does not give in. He does not surrender. He never stops. And on the other side, you've got Republican leadership who opens the conversation with a peremptory surrender. And they always say, well, gosh, we can't win, so we're going to surrender on everything. If that's the case, what was the point of winning Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate if we're not going to stand for anything? And Dan, let me tell you how this all plays out. What happens, it all starts with Republican leadership's promise that there will never, ever, ever be a government shutdown. Now, on its face, that sounds quite reasonable to folks in the private sector. Gosh, why would you shut things down? The problem is when you're dealing with the other side that are zealots. Barack Obama hears that and says, aha, it's very simple. All I have to do is whisper the word shutdown, and Republican leadership will run to the hills and hide. And so given that, Barack Obama stands up and says, you must fund 100% of Obamacare. Do nothing to help the millions of people who are hurting under this failed law, who've lost their jobs, who've lost their health insurance, who've seen their health insurance premiums skyrocket. And if you don't fund all of Obamacare, I, Barack Obama, will veto funding for the entire federal government. And Republican leadership goes, okay, we'll fund Obamacare. He does the same thing on executive amnesty. If you don't fund my illegal and unconstitutional executive amnesty, I, Barack Obama, will veto funding for the federal government. And Republican leadership surrenders and says, sure, we'll fund amnesty. He does that on Planned Parenthood. Leadership says, sure, we'll fund Planned Parenthood. He does that on the catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal, the single greatest national security threat facing America, and leadership again surrenders. What I can tell you is this, Dan, you lose 100% of the fights that you never fight. That's what Republican leadership does right now. It surrenders and gives in to Obama and the Democrats.
Amen, Senator, and we appreciate you being there to fight the good fight, regardless of what your colleagues may be saying and thinking about you doing that while you were there. But the American people are, I think, just very eager for that bold type of leadership in Washington, D.C. that they haven't seen in a while. And we saw it on the other side of the chamber and the House this past week when the Speaker of the House resigned. And that really was, I believe, because of pressure from the American people to say, you know what, we're tired of the status quo of leadership. We want some fighters up there leading our Congress. And how do you feel about that?
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and that's the reason John Boehner announced his resignation, is that for too long, Republican leadership has not been honoring the promises we made to the men and women who elected us. You know, we were told that if only we had a Republican House of Representatives, then things would be different. So millions of us rose up in 2010. We won an historic tidal wave election, and very little changed. Then we were told the problem is the Senate. It's Harry Reid in the Senate. And so in 2014, the American people obliged yet again, another historic tsunami election, won 9 Senate seats, retired Harry Reid as majority leader, won the largest majority in the House since the 1920s. And what exactly has the Republican majority in both houses done in the 9 months we've been in charge? You know, when I ask that at town halls, the answer is consistently absolutely nothing. And sadly, Dan, I have to respond, it's even worse than that. It would be better if they had done nothing, because what in fact they've done, right after the election, Republican leadership joined with Harry Reid in passing a $1 trillion cromnibus bill filled with corporate welfare and pork. Then they voted to fund Obamacare. Then they voted to fund executive amnesty. Then they voted to fund Planned Parenthood. And then Republican leadership took the lead in confirming Loretta Lynch as Attorney General. Now, I ask you, which one of those decisions is one iota different from what would have happened under Harry Reid and the Democrats?
Yeah, nothing.
That's why people are so frustrated.
You know, and I think there's this whole issue going on all over the country, Senator, of the separation of powers, the vertical separation between the federal government and the states, but also the horizontal separation, the executive and the legislative and judicial branches. Yes. And we see Congress and our leadership abdicating their responsibility to the judiciary. And I think the people in America are saying, wait a minute, we used to have a voice in this by electing our representatives. Now we no longer even have a voice. We might as well just have a few judges wearing black robes up in D.C. and let them take all the work on their own shoulders.
Dan, you're exactly right. We've got an imperial judiciary that's out of control, that's engaged in rampant judicial activism, and all of the issues that we're discussing. That's why I'm running for president, because we need a strong conservative leader who will actually stand with the American people and who will take on what I call the Washington cartel, career politicians in both parties who get in bed with lobbyists and special interests and grow and grow and grow government. You know, it's interesting. You look at these presidential debates, the last 2 debates. You've got a lot of very good people running for president on the Republican side. And just about every one of them holds themselves out as someone willing to take on Washington. But people naturally ask the question, okay, well, what's your record? When have you ever stood up to Washington, not just Democrats, but to leadership in your own party? And there is a marked difference. Even right now today, these battles over stopping the taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood and stopping the money to implement this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal, you will notice that none of the other presidential candidates are involved in leading or in any meaningful way. They're nowhere to be found. And I think that's the reason our campaign is getting such incredible momentum on the ground, is because grassroots conservatives in North Carolina and nationally are looking for a consistent conservative who doesn't just talk the talk, but they can trust to be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and to actually take on the Washington cartel.
Well, Senator Ted Cruz, thank you as always for your leadership, and thank you for joining us on Call to Action.